So I'm going to mix it up a bit. But I'm actually, oh, where's the forward? Is this it? Yeah, good. I have to tell you that whatever I say has nothing to do with the U.S. Navy, the U.S. government, or my grandmother. I deny everything on the face. Okay, let's go. So what I'm going to talk about today is an approach I take to cybersecurity. I was minded when an earlier speaker said we should redefine it, and I like to think about it not as much as cybersecurity as cyber uncertainty, because it links right back into my approach, which is surprise and large-scale socio-technical economic systems. And I'm going to use a couple of words today from that field. One in particular I want you to think about is called path dependence. And I was reminded of that when you spoke of how the choice architecture frames what you think you can do. And path dependence is at least as strong in terms of what you think you can do in the future. So that's going to be one of them, and the rest you can assume, surprise, and all that good stuff. Let's tell some bad news. This is what we thought we were getting 25 years ago, right? The village, yeah, wonderful. This is what we got. What happened? Well, it wasn't good news. What we got instead of our village or universal prosperity, we got massive crime. For the longest time, people kept saying, where's the number? Where's the blood on the sands, man? Where are the numbers? Well, now we have a number. On average, 1% to 2% of your GDP is lost in the advanced westernized states to cybercrime. We got anonymizing sites that, thank you to MIT, we know is used mostly by pedophiles, organized crime, and governments. We have a new form of conflict, something Pete Dabrowski and I worked on called cyber conflict. It's a spectrum between peace and war, and it means you're constantly in this little just below the threshold kind of fight. One of the things we did is we decided cyber war only existed at the end of the spectrum, when you actually combine kinetic attacks with cyber, and we now have a cyber war going on. Anybody want to guess where? No, come on, kinetic. Aw, Russia, Ukraine. Here's the interesting thing for all the folks who do war termination and so on. Think about this for a moment. The Russians move very smoothly into cyber-enabled kinetic attacks and right back into cyber conflict where you can't find them. And they do it at will. This is your future. So that's where we are. We're also where we have the accelerated movement of the centers of economic and demographic power to Asia. Whoops. And we have the systemic undermining of the rules of the international liberal system. If you don't believe me, look at the recent UK Strategic Defense and Security Review. Look at the conditions under which they list. And the final condition under what we're facing today says the loosening and lack of control over the rules of the liberal international economic system. So if you can't believe the Brits, I don't know. Borders are going up. This is cyber Westphalia. Your cyber borders, we talked about them 6 years ago. We were treated like dim-wit cousins. Now people going, oh yeah, we know about that. What does that mean? That people are basically saying in our open, wonderful, free internet, whoa, stop. Tell me who you are first. This is going on all over the world, but particularly in the autocratic systems. That's why they're bigger. And then everywhere else as well. In 2008, the Swedes passed a law saying that the Swedish federal police could look at every single packet that transited Sweden. This is not the world we thought we were getting 25 years ago. So I thought, I wrote a recent piece about it, and I thought I would take my approach and try and explain how the heck we got here. One of the things that's already been done, there's been a lot of discussions on the technical reasons we're here, from the poorly coded or insecurely coded internet. I coded myself in Lisp. If you'd all use my language, we'd have a lot of less problems, but no. Okay, fine. We standardized that poor code all over the world, and now we're bolt-on security afterwards, trying to figure out who's using it and who's exploiting us. Secondly, I just mentioned the economics. We connected everything that mattered. When I was first teaching MIS for poets in the 1990s, nothing was connected that mattered. So we said, go for it. Now it is connected as mattered, and we haven't really, well, we've now begun to realize what that is costing us. Now we have basically billions of people can reach into your pocketbook, right? Well, billions, millions, close to billions anyway. And finally, the systemic part. We opened up this insecure reach into your pocketbook system everywhere, and the ripple effects are systemic as well. But the problem is we haven't really explained this as well. Why has it taken us so long to react to this and fix it? And I'm going to argue as quickly as possible, 4 reasons. None of them are going to make any of us feel good. Naive optimism, security-blind libertarian economics, hubris, ours, and scale neglect. Let's get started real quickly. It's not going to come as a great surprise to you. I was one of those people pushing e-commerce everywhere and opening the database to I knew better, but I did it anyway. We were supposed to get a free, safe, community-enhancing, fun, convenient, automatically democratizing internet. That's what we were promised. And unfortunately, we sold it so well that for the next 15 years, people believed that if you connected to the internet, it automatically democratized your entire world. Therefore, it was worth our trouble to force it down the throats of anybody else who they wanted the internet, but they didn't want to democratize it. We said, no, if you get on the internet, it's going to democratize you. And furthermore, you won't need governments. Wisdom of the crowds. We're going to basically be in such numbers, knowledge will pass automatically. For those of you who've ever been to the Western United States, we have this thing when you come across a pile of manure, what we say? There's a pony in there somewhere. We believe that, and we told everyone that. That's number 1. We believed it until very recently. Endless norms conferences, go to them. Over and over again, I just need to persuade you that the internet's going to make a better world for you. What's the second thing that happened? Security-blind, libertarian economic business models. Okay, this is a contract, it's a social contract issue. We've said this in our democratic, westernized societies, we've said this for 200 years or more, if you've been around that long. If you make the best business you can in the world, we on the other side, the government otherwise, will make a safe world for you, and that includes the internet. What happened was, people didn't pick my language. Instead of picking fault-intolerant languages, they picked fault-tolerant languages. They coded it everywhere. The focus was on reliability, not on security, and the use of a public web. They took the notion of public goods that came out of universities and spread it right into the return on investment in the large-scale IT capital goods industry. They didn't particularly care about democratization, by the way. They mostly cared about return on investment, but they did actually have a notion, I'm going to follow my colleagues and skip through things, that if you, I'm good, I've got time? Okay, good. The notion that government, remember the naive guy said, no government, it will automatically fade away. These guys said, yeah, no government, sounds good to me. I don't want any, thank you very much. But we're special. We're special. We're the internet. We bring you the village. So we don't want any of your government controls, and if you touch us, you'll destroy our generativity, right? So if you regulate us, you destroy generativity, and therefore government, you're too stupid to get involved anyway. In fact, we have statements from 1996 to 2005, there were statements where if government gets involved, you are automatically too dumb to keep up with the scale, and you're too stupid to keep up with us, you'll just get in the way. And we believe that too. So by the time you get to the 2000s, you see a merge of the two streams, the naive optimism and the security-blind international IT capital goods industry. And largely atechnical leaders signed on because they didn't know any better, they hadn't programmed, and it was magic anyway. And we ended up with that policy. Foreign policies. Domestic policies so vigorously trying so very hard to get out of the way of the IT community. And then they turned to the security community and said, do your best. Try. Whatever you can do, it's good. Right? And then we went to the foreign policy, we did the same thing. Except we got worse. We even said, you connect to the internet, it's the only way you'll have prosperity, and by the way, you must democratize. Because it's going to happen anyway. Why fight it? right? Norms. We actually have a Secretary of State in the United States about 4 years ago running around promoting a way to use peer-to-peer computing across borders to violate other people's sovereignty and get into their internet. Why? Because it's supposed to happen that way. Right? The third thing, Western hubris. Why should you let the internet democratize your country? Because it's going to happen anyway. Why? Because we know that. We have this logic, which is you want to use the internet, it will be critical to your economic prosperity. If you want to have your internet, your economic prosperity, you have to abide by the rules of the international liberal economic system. So you put those two together, you abide by the rules, you open up your internet, what happens? Poof, you're going to democratize. So why you, autocratic country or anybody else, why would you fight this democratization? Therefore, we're helping you if we show people how to violate your national sovereignty and get your internet open. Follow this logic. What's our presumption? You'll be there anyway? If you are opposed to this, you are not a good government. You are not a good government. All right. Compliance just means being good. What's the problem? There turned out to be, when we made the rules of the liberal international economic system, there were two major players who did not actually sit at the table, Russia and China. Suddenly they're at the table, and they're not signed on. They're going to ultimately be westernized, liberal, democratic systems. And they began in 1995 to 2005. They actually said, okay, I want the money. That's good. I'm on. Yes, we know all about the Chinese hacks. There are a lot of them that happen we don't know about. We know all about the Chinese hacks. But their presumption was that you would understand sovereignty. By the time 2005 comes along, they're beginning to get a hint that we're not understanding sovereignty. Right? By the time 2005 comes along, you see the Chinese beginning to go, well, we might have to change this liberal international economic system, particularly the rules of cyberspace, because you're not listening to me. They had a legitimate expectation that the UN would say, cyberspace looks just like other things in between states, so I guess your sovereignty matters. And we would go over our board, over and over again. We even developed a different term. We used to use multilateral all the time. We developed a different term, multi-stakeholder. There is something the Chinese really don't want to hear. Because that means Google's going to sit at the same place as the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs and tell him how to work his internet. I don't think so. And they don't think so. So by the time you move along, you say 2005, 2012, the Chinese are beginning to already counter these things. 2009, they have a special treaty with Russia, right? It's interesting. Read the treaty, the SCO treaty on internet. Basically what they say is we are sovereign nations. Hello, we're sovereign nations. And by the way, in accordance with all the rules of the international economic and otherwise system, we are still sovereign nations. And we get to use it that way. And we, at the UN and elsewhere, that was tabled, and we stood as one and said, no, you cannot put that out and discuss it any further. And for a while, it worked. What did they do? They're not dumb. They started using their economic weight. They started replacing people in key positions in the UN. And this was so effective that 2 years ago, in order to stop a process that was going on, a multi-stakeholder process, the US and other westernized states actually had to get up, take their ball and go home, walk out of the hall to stop a vote. It was the Wick Road, if anybody wants to know. I mean, Wicket. How did that happen? How could we have been so blindsided? Because of the first two reasons. We simply couldn't get beyond our own hubris. Now what we have explicit statements by Putin and by Xi Jinping rejecting westernized values. And we have explicit discussions in the Chinese literature. I have a colleague I work with who's literate in Mandarin, where they discuss the fact they're actually surprised. They expected to kind of get to the top of the heap by 2049, and they're surprised that we were so blindsided. Right? The fourth thing is scale. We tend not to recognize scale. in the US. We talk a lot about it, but we move immediately from the single user to the big system as if they were the same. Right? And we tend to miss the fact that the scale of these kinds of economic losses are going to, over time, irrespective of how you gather them up, are going to change the path dependence of our futures. That's another architecture. It will frame what you do in the future. The scale of the raising of the Asian centers of demographic and economic power. There's a challenge to the liberal economic system, and we stand around going, well, my gosh, come on, just comply, you'll feel better. Unfortunately, it doesn't work so well. Read a lot of the articles that are only the U.S.'s trade representative having, some of the difficulties they're having. This is an important one here. China's scale in particular. It's not just that China is one single, is large. It's that China is an organized large. It's a single entity operating in here. If you don't believe in scale, then look at the fact that you have a single organized entity operating in a large-scale system with which it explicitly says it does not agree. And they're able to use their economic power. Last fall, Xi Jinping came and visited the US president. But before he did that, he stopped over where? In Seattle. And he talked to the CEOs of major IT capital goods companies. Here's a question for you. Did every CEO who went to talk to Xi Jinping do it willingly? Obviously, wouldn't ask the question if the answer wasn't no. However, most of them were told quite privately, oh, you don't want to come? You know, you might have difficulty when you do business in China. And they all like signed up. This is the kinds of activity that's going on. And of course they would do it. They weren't being heard. They're being heard now. And we waited to be surprised. And the other thing about scale is we tend to operate as if every single individual country is in and of itself equal with every single other one, and that's of course consistent. As you have the westernized system, as it grows up in the internet, there's going to be a question about whether the scale of a Denmark is equivalent to the scale of a US, the scale of a China. And there is a lack of countervailing scale in this international socio-technical economic system that sustains the very vision of the internet that we had planned and wanted to begin with. Right? So I'm going to end. Oops. Or maybe I'm not. Forgot I told you. I've already said all these things. We have basically lost this web. Yep, I got ahead of myself already, so let's move on. What are we doing now? We're building borders in cyberspace. By the way, those borders are sometimes legal. Sometimes they're going to be built on the national telecoms organizations that exist from the former PTTs. And in some cases, what we're doing is we're building cyber commands. And one of the other pieces of research I do is I track the creation of cyber commands. And what we see in 2015 is what I call a virtual tsunami of cyber commands. This will be normal for us. This is the way we're responding. We're bolting on security, guys. We are not only going to have these cyber commands, but we're going to be using them in the future in basically our foreign policies. And there's no standardized model. There's no standardized mission breadth. Is it just cyber? Is it signals? Is it intel? Is it everything? Can we tell our IT capital goods people what to do from our cyber command? Do we tell them from the civilian side? And it's going to be particularly consequential as we build these borders in cyberspace. The village is gone. And finally, worse all, it's going to be heavily involved in deception. And it's really hard to reconcile that with our liberal democratic systems. This is what you saw last year. I was pleased to see you said build on what you saw last year. So last year I made an argument. I won't go through, but I will say it privately if you want. That cyber power is more than a cyber command. There are 4 layers of surprise that we now face as a function of how we got here. And if your society is focused cyber power on cyber command, you're going to lose the first 3 layers, which are basically resilience. And so it's worth asking the question, if you build a cyber command, what are they doing for you? The future In this Cyber-Westphalian world of robust and weak cyber powers will depend on how well countries actually coordinate all 4 layers, institutional responses across all 4 layers, resilience, and then forward disruption. I will tell you this in my research, there are 7 originating cyber commands, variously defined and structured, and of the 7, 3 have already reorganized, i.e. it didn't work. We need to move forward. I'm at the end. We need to recognize the internet's not magic. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's not globally democratizing. It's not making a village. It's just not magic. And we need to also have a similar view of the IT capital goods industry. They're not magical. They're not that special. They're a major part of our GDP, yeah. But they're not that special anymore, right? We also need to simply say, okay, cyber sovereignty is a given. Let's work with this. Let's figure it out. Because we're not going to go back to that open, wonderful, global, unfettered internet. It's done. And if the Chinese play and the Russians play a bigger role, going to make sure it's done. By the way, for anyone who wants to do some research, let's ask an important question. Where is international cyberspace? Is it the middle of the Atlantic? Does it start when those submarine cables come up on your territorial ground? Or when the first packet hits your telecoms agencies? That's an unanswered question. And finally, very American, I meant to change that, scale kicks butt. Okay? It's time for us to recognize that. I know everyone in Israel knows this. I know you guys understand this better than any of us. But the rest of the westernized world does not. And we have to figure out a way to produce a countervailing scale to the more autocratic responses that will determine the choice architecture of our future Cyber-Westphalian world. Thank you very much.